Hey guys, welcome to another episode of WODtv. Lucas Parker here, joined by AJ today. She's a CrossFit competitor and coach at CrossFit Vic City under Cam Birchwell, fitness mastermind and physiologist extraordinaire. So today we're coming at you with a product review of an elevation training mask. This is something that's become a little bit popular in MMA circles especially, and is maybe gaining some ground in the CrossFit community. We're going to take a look at its application to our style of training, our sport, and see if it's beneficial or not. So I'll turn things over to AJ and she'll tell you a bit about the mask.
So here's the mask. We have 3 caps with interchangeable resistance for both inspiration and exhalation. It goes on your face like this, and Velcro to strap in the back. This configuration for the caps, it should, according to the manual, make the resistance and breathing similar to training about 9,000 feet, but as Cam will go into, we'll see why that may or may not be accurate.
Thanks, AJ. So basically, the claim of the elevation training mask is simulating altitude. And the interest of that for athletes is that a lot of endurance athletes actually do train at altitude to gain some beneficial effects when they're actually trying to perform at sea level. So what I'm going to kind of explain today is how altitude actually affects the body physiologically, and whether or not we can expect the same results from the elevation training mask based on its configuration and use. So we're just going to take a look over here at this little diagram. Basically, this here is your lung tissue. It's a magnification, obviously. This is a blood vessel going by the lung tissue, and this little shuttle bus here is a red blood cell. Basically, they are the shuttles of our bloodstream of nutrients and oxygen, things like that. So, what I'm going to talk about now is how the oxygen actually filters through into your bloodstream at sea level. At sea level and at altitude, we have a concentration of oxygen of about 21%. That doesn't change if you're at sea level or at elevation. All that changes is the pressure of the oxygen that's driving the molecules of oxygen into your lung tissue. So you can see I've got a big arrow here. So at sea level, we've got this big arrow, a lot of pressure driving these oxygen molecules across the barrier from the lung into the bloodstream, where there's a low concentration of oxygen. So if we've got a high concentration here, low there, it's it's what we call a pressure gradient, drives a lot of oxygen across the barrier. Now at altitude, what happens is this big arrow basically becomes a smaller arrow. There's less pressure in the air in general, so there's less of a drive from the lung tissue into the bloodstream. Now, as a result of that, with this red blood cells going by the lung tissue, they can't pick up as much oxygen. So your body responds by making more red blood cells to carry more oxygen. And when you return to sea level, you can utilize that better oxygen carrying capacity to have a better aerobic performance. In other words, you can basically work faster while still remaining aerobic, which is a benefit for a lot of endurance type athletes. So now that you know a little bit more about how altitude actually affects performance and physiological adaptations, I'm going to talk about what the altitude or the elevation training mask actually does. So AJ mentioned you have different resistance levels based on which caps are actually on the mask here. So basically what's happening is we're not changing necessarily the concentration of the oxygen in the air. We're not changing the pressure, the partial pressure of the oxygen in the air, but we are changing the resistance through which you're breathing the air in and also expiring. So, in terms of simulating altitude, it doesn't really do that, but in terms of developing the respiratory muscles and potentially making them stronger, it may actually positively affect your performance.
Alright guys, so we gave you a breakdown of how the mask works and how the physiology works for altitude training, and whether or not the mask might actually be involved in altitude. We are going to run an experiment with the mask. It's going to cover 6 weeks, and it's going to assess, how the mask impacts regular CrossFit training with a number of factors that we're going to sort of talk about. Cam, can you delve into the experiment that you're putting together?
Yeah, for sure. So with any kind of training modification or training device, you do some pre and post testing to evaluate the effects of the device, and you need a long enough time of utilizing the device to actually measure whether or not it has an impact on performance. So our training time is going to be a 6-week period. Before that 6-week period, we're going to do 2 pre-test workouts. One's going to be the 10-minute Aerodyne test for max calories, so a pretty steady state aerobic test. And then the other one's going to be a 3-rounder of 400-meter run, 15 wall balls, and 10 burpees. So a more CrossFit, obviously more CrossFit type workout with more variations in breathing as you go through the workout.
And these tests are without the mask, right?
Correct, yeah. So we're doing the pre and post test without the mask. And in the 6-week training block, we'll be actually utilizing the mask for 2 WODs during the week, which will involve rowing and Aerodyne, as well as performing the recommended breathing exercises that come with the mask on every training day, essentially.
Interesting. So a couple issues I see coming up with this are, number one, the small group of participants, just having a couple people for data points. No real way to get around that. I think, most people that do product reviews essentially just try something out once and tell about how they feel about it. So this is going to be a great sort of step forward in that. We like to take a more scientific approach to things. So along those lines, how are you going to separate the effect of the mask over 6 weeks from just getting fitter from normal training over 6 weeks?
Right, so two really important components of a solid research study. One is having a control group, so a group of individuals who are performing the same type of training but without the intervention. So myself and AJ will be using the mask. The rest of our competition team here at Vic City will be doing the same protocols, but they'll be basically training without the mask for the whole duration of the study.
Okay.
The second thing is blinding the participants to the results of their pre and post tests. So as we all know through CrossFit, if you do a 330 Fran one time and you know that's your target time, you're going to really try and hit a 325 or a 320 Fran the next time. The same thing happens with a 10-minute Aerodyne test or a WOD that's completely new to you. So what we're going to do in the pre-test is we're going to obscure, on that 10-minute Aerodyne test, we're going to obscure the whole monitor except for the elapsed time. So the participants won't know how many calories they've burned, and they also won't know how many watts they're putting out as they're completing the test. So they'll have very little information. And our brains actually subconsciously process this information each time we exercise. So if we gave the subjects that information, they would use that in their next attempt. So we're going to blind them from that, and we're also going to compare our results with the control group.
Interesting. Very good. Yeah, definitely a more comprehensive sort of product review than a lot that we see out there. Aside from the measurable impacts on training, maybe AJ, can you give us some insight into your particular benefit that you might get from wearing this mask?
Yeah, so I struggle with breathing often at the end of the workout and after I'm done workouts. It's called stress-induced respiratory stridor, so the muscles in my neck and shoulders tense up, and it's unlike exercise-induced asthma, definitely physiological and psychological elements there together. So hopefully this mask would just help me concentrate a little bit more on my breathing, strengthen the muscles so that I'm taking deeper belly breaths rather than breathing high in my chest, and hopefully being able to sustain that belly breathing longer through the workout rather than kind of resorting to these light fluttery breaths at the end, therefore stress me out, make me think I can't get the air in.
Deeper breaths, using the diaphragm more to breathe, and also kind of being more conscious of your breathing as you're going through. And the one thing we discussed earlier is that there is a consideration when using the mask that it may affect your performance while you're training. Do you want to kind of elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So this is a potential setback of using this. Is that, let's say you're training you're doing a 2K row, and normally let's say you row a 2K in 7 minutes. if you put this mask on and it increases the difficulty, and you end up rowing, you know, a 2K in 7 minutes and 20 seconds or 7.5 minutes, at the end of the day, your output was less. You rowed more slowly. So it's like, why would you do something that makes you slow down and lowers your power output? Yes, you're working on your, you know, respiratory muscles, but is that the limiting factor in your training, or is it more the cellular adaptations that we want?
Yeah, and it remains to be seen, and definitely, you know, with each individual there may be variation, so it's going to be a really interesting experiment, and it's good to have AJ volunteering her physiology to participate.
Thanks for tuning in.
Hold on, wait. What's up? You want me in the shot? Come on now.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our review, the elevation training mask. Part 2 will be a midpoint check-in, and part 3 will discuss the results and our thoughts on the experiment. Thanks for watching. See you later.